Photography, a troubling of theoretical space, a methodology enabling the artist, the researcher, the teacher, an exploration of the praxis of interrelationships. Undertaking orthographic inquiry is to strive to bring creativity and intellectual purpose to the academic dialogue, to push boundaries, question convention, and ask why. To position myself orthographically, I search to unveil that which I may not be conscious of, to understand where my tensions dwell. As a woman who is an artist, I am very much rooted in my identity as a geographer. My seeing begins in a multiplicity of landscapes. Landscape interpretation of the physical, social, cultural, personal are but a few of the representations that I seek to disclose visually. As a woman who is a researcher, I begin by framing my area of study, where my curiosity resides, having long wondered how women's transformational experiences occur in shifts between the private and public worlds. I question, what happens when a woman reveals the private self in an open public forum? Is she embraced, enabled, criticized, or worse, isolated? And as a woman who is a teacher, I explore how being an artist and researcher informs my day-to-day practice. But before I begin to engage in an exploration of the lived experiences of others, I must foreground myself in the elements that influence my perspective. I take this opportunity to privilege the role of artist and investigate my process of creating, as the researcher-teacher roles have already been the focus of reflection and action in the past. To know who you are, you must know where you come from, and so I begin by describing my artistic practice as divining intoxication. It is through this practice that I then engage in a series of renderings, visually symbolizing the construction of, and culmination from, many to a single representation of meaning. To divine is to engage by sensing, an act of intuitive movement through a given temporal and spatial realm. My divining rod is the camera, the tool which I hold in my hands and pass over the surface of the ground, through which I hope to learn something yet unknown, to search for hidden meaning in the visual. According to Nietzsche, this learning to see is habituating the eye to repose, to patience, to letting things come to it, learning to defer judgment, to investigate and comprehend the individual case in all its aspects. I divine the visual when I come upon a shape in a landscape that intrigues. So I begin. My art has long relied on a spontaneous unfolding as I move through a landscape. I cannot create with expectation. My photography is an amorphous process, an unconscious knowing, and when I feel a pleasing composition through the lens, I etch the image upon the film with a single click of the shutter. I enter the realm of intoxication when divining reveals a new theme, a new way of seeing. Over 100 years ago, Nietzsche wrote, "For art, for any sort of aesthetic activity or perception to exist, a certain physiological precondition is indispensable, intoxication. Intoxication must first have heightened the excitability of the entire machine. No art results before this happens. All kinds of intoxication, however different in origin, have the power to do this. The essence of intoxication is the feeling of plenitude and increased energy. From out of this feeling one gives to things, one compels them to take, one calls this procedure idolizing." Photography has long been my escape from distress. It is the balance that gives to me for all that is taken away. In fact, there is an interrelationship between the want for images with vibrant colors that evoke a sense of pleasure, comfort, and perhaps beauty, and the personal experiences around an increasing magnitude of grief, loss, and pain. Images that affirm life and living through a sense of pure joy are my means of intoxicating and prompt my sharing of these visuals in a public realm, rather than images of death and destruction. In doing so, am I shaping the vision of others? Do I embed values in images of the natural landscape that I am not conscious of? Do I instill gender differences in a photograph of seasonal leaves in transformation? When I look back onto these private images, which have found a public forum in exhibitions and publications, I find I'm questioning, how are these photos representative of my own transformations? To intoxicate is the action or power of exhilarating the mind. But by definition, intoxication is also a state of being poisoned, a corruption of self. And as an artist, I recognize the addiction to enter into and reside in this state by divining the visual. It is a necessary state of being for my existence. To render is to depict by artistic means. To express my understanding of artography, I adopt a series of renderings. Each rendering is introduced with autoportraiture. These abstract forms of representation serve to negotiate the tensions I experience. Giving words and order to an amorphous process of rendering is difficult. For me, renderings overlap, are concurrent, and must be viewed as interconnected layers with many threads. Drawing on my geographic self, I adopt the symbolic imagery of an arbutus tree to explore how, as an artist, I embed meaning in the visual. The evolution of this image offers insight into the process of divining intoxication. At the same time as I reflect on this tree as a whole, I am considering my seeing with a theoretical turn. I recognize that for many years my artist self has resided quite purposefully apart from my research and teaching selves. Now these three worlds are colliding, becoming entwined with, for, and to, shedding light on my ways of being. From the whole I move to the opposite, the macro, the up-close and intimate. This tree holds many parts, offering lines, circular turns, folds. It is both the understood tree and the abstraction of possibilities. It is here I find a doubling of meaning. It is a space that troubles, a tension that carries my thinking back to transformations. While reflecting on my embodiment as a woman artist, I find at the same time I'm wondering if the movement between the private and public sphere is an emotional response that connects our many selves. Perhaps it is these threads that we seek to weave together. The arbutus tree is an embodiment of living that maps an endless number of interpretations and meanings. To me, the arbutus tree, unlike other species, represents a feminine spirit. The female ruptures forth in the richly textured curves and rounded forms. A hardwood, which is revealed in the peeling of the bark, conceals an inner skin, soft, smooth, silky to the touch. This tree speaks to me, and I to her. To open a dialogue exploring transformations, I turn to my emerging images, and it is here, in spaces in between, that the arbutus tree reveals a woman in repose, changing the experience of viewing the composite tree and shifting to an unanticipated viewpoint, where new meaning takes shape. I enter a creative space where intoxication consumes me from within. As I rework, rebuild, and redefine the woman in repose, I feel a sense of unfolding. To what end, I do not know. I enhance the hues, the saturation, I brighten and contrast, moving towards something yet undiscovered, in a suspension of consciousness, on a margin between and into a state that I do not choose or control, but simply respond to with an awareness of being. To recreate the arbutus tree, I look to the excess, to the background, lassoing the context, the elements that define the tree, branches, leaves, greens, browns. I remove, step out, and look back, and enter the image again. Without knowing the outcome, the artwork emerges in the midst of the process, bringing forward what was hidden in the whole, the woman in repose. I linger in the excess, not static, yet always in a state of suspension. I pause and then redo, changing renditions of the same. I remain rooted in my senses, my intuitiveness. In my intoxication, I find myself absent from the public sphere. I am absent from all that is consciousness. Somehow, this absence is an aesthetic transformation of my private and public self. Woman in repose is evolving, emerging, becoming. I reverberate in the image, considering and reconsidering nuance, reworking the excess by mixing tones, revisiting each rendering in turn. I begin to question if absence is in fact another rendering of artographic inquiry. I borrow from contiguity, openings, metaphor, metonym, reversing the viewpoint until the visual feels right. And it is at this moment that my sense of intoxication lessens, and I disentangle from the creative process, leaving me to contemplate my roles of artist, researcher, and teacher. Is the state of suspension, in which absence flourishes, part of all realms? Is absence a rendering? Are transformations really restorations of seeing?